Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. I always try to set up my polls so that I won't be disappointed either way, but I was pretty excited to see this one win it. Astra Lost in Space has been on my radar for a while, so let's just get into it. The series takes place in the year 2063, which actually isn't that far off in the future anymore, but is still distant enough to make casual space travel seem a little more plausible. We're introduced to a girl named Ares, who's recently transferred to a new high school and is looking forward to the upcoming planet camp. That's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A school-sanctioned camping trip that takes small groups of students to one of the neighboring planets for a few days. Ares is bubbly and optimistic, and thinks this sounds like the perfect opportunity to make some new friends. Though we're introduced to Ares first, she and the other members of her planet camp team actually share the spotlight pretty equally throughout the rest of the series. But we'll get to the character rundown in a minute. The journey to Planet Mikpah goes off without a hitch. Their teacher tells them someone will be back to pick them up in 5 days and leaves, but they're not even able to set up any kind of camp before some kind of sphere appears before them. For the sake of simplicity, I'll tell you now that they later discover this to be a miniature wormhole, but they don't have time to examine it before it sucks them all in and spits them out in the middle of space. There are only 2 things around, as far as the eye can see: a dead, iced-over planet, and an old spaceship floating in its orbit. The other members of Team B5 weren't exactly everything Ares had been hoping for when she first arrived. A lot of her classmates were only participating in this planet camp to get credits for a class, and a couple were outright unfriendly. But something starts to shift immediately in the group dynamic once they're stranded and overcome the first hurdle of helping each other get safely to the spaceship, which miraculously is still in working condition. They've been transported too far away for their communication devices to work, but they are able to plot a course, pinballing from one planet to another to restock supplies that just might get them back home, but it will require a lot of teamwork. So let's take a look at this team and the roles they settle into on the ship, which they christen the Astra. Zach's a young genius who was already dreaming of exploring space one day, so he quickly steps up to be their pilot. When you first meet him, he comes across as being cold and distant, but the more time you spend with Zach, the clearer it becomes that he's not trying to be unfriendly, he's just not great at expressing himself. He often doesn't realize that certain things that are obvious to him aren't always so clear to everyone else. Kitari is a little difficult to explain, actually. She initially comes across as kind of shallow and irritable. She's the complainer of the group, and not the type to go in for any kind of camping if it wasn't a school assignment, but I don't want to paint her like she was really unlikable or annoying. She does get off to a rough start, but she's pretty moved by Ares' enthusiasm and innocence right from the beginning. Kitari's really the polar opposite of Zach. She wears her heart on her sleeve, which means she's often the first to cry or freak out when things get rough. But she really steps up when she needs to, taking on the role of the ship's doctor. Her mother's a famous doctor, and Kitari was already training to follow in her footsteps, even though their relationship is pretty non-existent as her mom's rarely home. A big factor in why Kitari struggles to let people in and comes across as a little prickly at first. So it was especially rewarding to see her slowly get on board with Ares' whole power of friendship thing. The high schoolers are being accompanied by Kitari's little sister, Phoenicia. She's kinda your generic little kid character, to be honest. Funi's inclusion actually has more to do with some of the bigger plot reveals later in than anything else. So for now, we'll just say she was good for keeping up team morale. There were some subtler group dynamics that I really liked though, and one of my favorites was seeing Funi slowly soften up Olger, the edgiest, most outright unfriendly member of this group. But even he can't bring himself to be a jerk to a little kid. Job-wise, Olger proves himself to be an expert marksman, which is helpful whenever they're out exploring a new planet. All the way to the end, he comes across as a little unapproachable, but he's also lugging around a traumatic childhood, and it's understandable why he'd struggle to open up to people. I can't bring myself to reject him when I forgave Kitori for basically the same issue. Honestly, the rest of Team B5 and their easy acceptance of him and his flaws did a lot of work in winning me over. We're talking group dynamics. I love seeing an edgy, angsty character having friendship basically forced on him by a bunch of goofballs. Funi may have been subtly getting closer, but Luca was the one who really attached himself to Olgar's side and declared them to be friends now. Luca was fairly easy to like, upbeat and playful, a bit of a troll actually, but in a way that was fun. He's the aspiring artist of the group and good with his hands. That translates into general ship maintenance and inventing cool gadgets for everyone. There's a big reveal about Luca's character that I don't want to spoil. One of those if you know type of things, but I really love the way Luca is characterized, the way he really fits into whatever group he's in, how comfortable he is in his own skin post-reveal. I'll leave it at that. Charse is the sparkly, charming, princely type, personality-wise, another one who's pretty easy to like from the start. Job-wise, he's one of the most important members of this team. Charse has a passion for biology and helps create a device that can determine which plants and animals they encounter are safe to eat. I have the least to say about Yunhua, not because she's a lesser character than the others. I think it's just because all her biggest moments are based on personal growth, rather than a specific connection or job within the team. Yunhua barely says a word for like the first 3 episodes. She's as withdrawn as they come, and a lot of what's weighing her down is precisely that so many of the others have specific jobs and she feels like she's useless here. When they finally bring her out of her shell, I'd say she jumps on keeping everyone's morale up as well, but honestly, she tended to fade into the background all the way to the end. And last but definitely not least is Kanata, their high-spirited leader. In some ways, he's the goofiest of them all, the only one who matches Ares' enthusiasm right from the start, and is prone to stating the obvious, but making it sound like he's giving sage advice. He nominates himself to be team captain before they've even left for space, and the others immediately shut him down. At first. But when everything falls apart, Kanata's the one who stays focused. When he was in middle school, he was part of a class trip to the mountains, where the students also got stranded for a while after their teacher died in an accident. So, yes, he can be a little hard to take seriously sometimes, but he's also done this before and understands that nothing's more important than keeping the team's spirits up. He's goofy, but takes his role as captain very seriously, and it doesn't take long to win everyone else over. And it's a good thing he's not easily discouraged, because on top of all the regular survival challenges, they're not on the ship long before Zack uncovers that someone's purposefully destroyed the Astra's communication system, recently enough that it had to be someone on board with them. The sudden appearance of the wormhole was suspicious enough. Now they're positive it wasn't some freak accident. Someone attacked them on purpose, and there's a traitor in their midst. Astra Lost in Space moves pretty fast, never in a way that made it feel too rushed, but I love a show that has no shortage of twists and turns. I've seen quite a few "there's a traitor among us" mysteries, and I think this one did a pretty good job with it. There was no one obviously suspicious member of this team. Olgar was the most openly unfriendly, but if anything that made him too obvious a red herring. Yunhua stood out a little because we knew so little about her at first, but I didn't suspect her at all, really, once she got her focus episode. It wasn't that there were some sketchy characters that I just wanted to look the other way for, either. I genuinely wasn't suspicious of anyone. They were all too likable for me to really believe it, pretty much right up until the culprit's revealed. Most shows with a traitor mystery plotline choose to go the route of making everyone just flawed enough to where it could believably be any one of them. This series took the opposite approach, and I found that really refreshing. And the traitor mystery is only one part of the bigger story. There's also the question of why they were targeted. That one was really interesting to see unfold over time. There were a couple questionable things from the start, like Kitari tells them her mother only recently adopted Funi, that they're not actually related, which is weird because you'd have to be blind not to see how much they look like sisters. If there was one aspect that did feel just a little rushed sometimes, it was that this is one of those shows where nearly everyone has a tragic past of some kind. It's hard to fit that many character backstories into just 12 episodes, and there were a couple moments where those tales felt like they were thrown into the conversations really abruptly. But they were important to include. They slowly start to reveal another possible connection. Most of the members of this team are the children of some pretty high-profile people back home. Kitari's mom is this hotshot doctor, and Zach's dad is a researcher helping her pioneer new projects. Yunhua's mom is a famous singer. Kanata's dad was a pro athlete. Luca's dad is a controversial politician who was recently under fire for opposing a new program that will require all citizens to give their DNA to the government for testing. Astra Lost in Space definitely has sci-fi leanings, what with the space travel and human experimentation plot lines, but most of the time, it struck me as feeling like a bite-sized version of all the things that make up some of the best long-running shounen series out there. The friendship-heavy adventure story, the dramatic backstories, the focus on teamwork and never giving up hope. I think this series has a pretty good reputation, but I was really feeling that it's not just good. It's a show that should have gotten popular. I feel like all the ingredients were there for this one to blow up, and I'm honestly not sure why it didn't. I feel like I've been saying this a lot lately, but as I was watching this show, I was really feeling that it should have gotten bigger than it did. I mean, on top of everything else, it even got a proper conclusion with a double-length final episode that made sure it took the time to catch up with all the characters and the state of the world. How many shows can boast that? I promised myself I'd do this review without spoilers for 2 reasons. 1, I really believe this show's main strengths can be talked about without going into those specifics, which I try to err on the side of whenever possible. And 2, this is really a series that you should experience for yourself, and get to experience with fresh eyes. The twists and turns really never stop coming, even after I expected the show to get a little more straightforward about tackling the final conflict. Once all the major mysteries about the characters and murder plot are solved, the big reveals turn their attention towards the world building instead, which I have to say was super satisfying. I had found myself thinking that they'd been pretty vague about their society and history, and that was something I was prepared to forgive, to write off as something that definitely wasn't the worst flaw a show could have, only to discover that, all this time, they'd been vague with a purpose. The series covers all its bases by the end, but I've saved this anime's biggest strength for last. If you like a found family story, you've come to the right place. And Astra Lost in Space isn't afraid to get a little mushy with it sometimes, and I mean that in the best way. I don't think I've ever seen another series, actually, that's as explicit about that found family element as this one is. That's usually the kind of thing fandom will read into for the characters. This show gets them all together near the end and spells out really plainly for the audience, you know what? Our pasts with our shitty families don't matter. We don't need them anymore because we've got each other now. And the discovery of what exactly connects them all and got them targeted for this ordeal complements that development really well. What was most interesting about the characters in this one for me, I mentioned that they're all pretty easy to like, but I'm not super attached to any one specific character on their own. What really won me over and got me invested was their bond as a team. This anime is something special. I can already feel that. The longer it sits with me, the more I'm going to like it. I already know a rewatch is somewhere in my future, so in case it wasn't clear enough, my recommendation is, yes, absolutely go check out Astra Lost in Space if this one passed you by. Thank you for watching.